Hello, it's great to be back. It's been a while since I last stood on this podium. Actually, I think it was 4 years ago. Thanks, COVID, for ruining a couple of game camps over the last couple of years. And what I'm going to talk about today is iOS pains and gains, or running UA in the Post IDFA world. And disclaimer number 0, because there are going to be more of them, is it's going to be mostly about the pains, not much about gains. But let's see what I can share with you. So first things first, I'm going to share also some real data. So I guess you can do screenshots, but please don't share those data outside of the auditorium. I mean, yeah, what stays in GameCamp stays in GameCamp. And yeah, let's go to it. So, a couple of things about me. I've been in the industry for 9 years. Most of it, actually, all of it, in this one company. So, I've been in the Pixel for like my whole professional career. Started as an analyst, moved to marketing, co-led the marketing department as the craft owner for the last 2 years. And actually, right now, I'm in the middle of transition, getting back to the roots. So going back a little bit to the analytics, but still can share a couple of things about marketing too. So that's the first. About the company, we're like Slovak's largest game developer, focusing on mobile free-to-play games, many games live. You can see a couple of them on the slide, and focusing primarily on tycoon simulation genre and also like puzzle adventure type of games like Diggy's Adventure, which was our most successful project. But today is not going to be about Diggy's. It's going to be about iOS and primarily on PlayStation 2. So let's make this session a little bit interactive. I promote you to ask questions on Slido, but please pick up your phones, and I'm going to start with a question for you first. So the question is UA on iOS a struggle for you right now? And please answer honestly. If no, if it's super easy, then I want to talk to you after the session. But okay, there's one. There's a couple that's no, there was an iOS. Nice. A couple of trolls here. But I guess it's pretty unanimous in a way that iOS is kind of a struggle for most of you guys. And this disclaimer number 1. It got super difficult for us. I mean, like, we were hit hard with iOS changes in privacy and the way we run marketing, and with the game monetization setup and type of genre that we are in. It got super difficult. So that's the first disclaimer. And the second one, yeah, we haven't figured it out yet. I wouldn't be standing here if we did. I guess I would be executing the strategy all day long, growing our business, but that wasn't the case. So that's why it's going to be mostly about the pains. But let's look at the numbers. Yeah, so I tend to share real numbers, not some fakery. So what you see on this chart is basically revenue trend for all the projects that we have from 2012 up until last year, and also for the marketing spend and profitability. And now the profitability, what it means, it doesn't account for OPEX. So it's just pure revenue minus marketing. So it's not necessarily on 100% sure like what's the EBITDA of the company, but you get the point and at least the trend, what has happened. After 2019, which was kind of a terrible year for us because we decreased quite significantly, 2022 wasn't the best either. After COVID boost, which you can see right here, 2 years, 2020, 2021, we again seen some decrease, even though marketing budgets stayed almost the same. So the biggest reason why we grew was COVID, but also release of one of the titles that I'm going to talk about a little bit more, Train Station 2, which is our current flagship. It takes most of the marketing budgets and basically is generating most of the revenue currently, and is a transport tycoon simulation game. I'll show one video how it sort of looks like. It's like an ASO video from the store. Not the newest one, but I guess you'll make most out of it. Okay, so that's the game. It's about building mostly. So, and about trains. And people love trains, apparently. We also have a ship game. People don't love ships that much. But that's not the story of today. All right, let's look at the chart tied to Train Station 2. So we launched the game in 2019. It had a rough start in the beginning, but then it wasn't only COVID. It was also a great redesign of the onboarding and some core mechanics. But the game grew quite a lot over the COVID period. And then we tried to push it pretty hard last year in the beginning, in 2022. Wasn't the best move. And we need to scale down significantly. And last 3 months weren't that bad. But this is all platforms together. Let's look at the breakdown. One important note, the scale changed. So we went from -2 to 2 million to -1 to 1 because we need to break down. So Android, we could scale pretty well even this year, but not so much on iOS. Yeah, as you can see, like, or at least I can see it there because I think it's there. The revenue might be pretty flat-ish, but the response rate to increased budgets that we did in the last couple of months didn't translate it that much to an actual revenue. However, the profitability in this case of iOS is pretty all right. Actually, on average, is even better than Android, but the scale is so much lower. And to put it in context, because like there are two charts, I don't know if anyone can like make right away what's the budget split between those two platforms. Actually, the split isn't that great. I mean, like when we launched the game, it was like 50-50, basically. Then it moved to 60-40, more towards Android. But last year, and actually not last, but this year, iOS budget only takes account for 30%. And that's not good since the iOS market is pretty huge. It's pretty, I would say, rich, but they have money. And players are still there. We just can't find them so efficiently as we used to in the past. And when we take a look at the breakdown by media sources or networks, there are a couple of obvious problems that we didn't tackle when we had the chance in the past, and now we are paying the price for that. And by that, I mean we were hugely reliant on Google and Meta over the over the history of the company, and we weren't experimenting much with other media sources. So we introduced a little bit more of a search ads in 2021. Then we scaled down because, well, they didn't bring that much value for this specific game or for any other game in our portfolio, actually. And we also didn't use that much of DSPs or other video ad networks like Iron Source, Unity, and you name it, Upload. And we tested them in 2021, 2022, but not as efficiently, not with so much focus that we could have like another leg on our chair or whatever. So we were still hugely reliant on ROAS coming from Meta and from Google, which was sufficient before ATT. Post ATT, it didn't help at all, and now we are paying the price that we need to relearn things and to test new networks. Currently, hugely invested in DSPs. Well, hugely, it's only 20%, so it's not that much. But still, for some titles, not Train Station 2 is actually the only media source that actually bringing the value for some projects, not for Train Station 2. Train Station 2 is still working really well on Meta and Google. But let's get further. So the issue obviously is diversification problem, that we only were relying on two major networks, and then that, yeah, of course, well, the budgets decreased significantly because we couldn't find value, or we couldn't, like, if we scaled up, we didn't see ROS coming in. And ultimately, like, it's not a problem if you're okay with certain amount of budget, but it's not okay when you try to grow your game, when you believe it has good metrics, high LTV. If you are staying flat with the spending, which is what happened on iOS during the last couple of, well, actually basically a year, even though the CPIs aren't rising that high, even though CPIs on iOS are surprisingly low compared to compared to Android for similar optimization. And even though we are still profitable, we can't scale it. We didn't figure it out yet. We are in the way. Well, we are in the process of figuring it out. Hopefully, we'll do it this year, and maybe next year will be a more interesting presentation. But the problem, diversification problem again. So all eggs in one or two baskets was an issue, and we are paying the price now when we can scale those two major networks, and we are only learning how to scale the other networks, DSPs and iron sources and unities of this world. And it would be much easier, much better if we learned it when we were super profitable, not now when we are right at the break-even point. So I would like to leave you with some actionable insights that you can, like, utilize for running not only Google, because I get that as well, but let's start with Meta. We optimize Meta by using SKAN. So let's look at our approach to setting up conversion values in SKAN. But again, another interactive poll. I would like to know how you approach SKAN conversion value schema setup. What do you use? If you are super advanced, or you are using player LTV, predicted player LTV, or using in-app events, or in-app revenue, or some custom schema. Okay, looks like most of you guys using combined revenue and in-app events. A couple of in-app events there. Let's wait for a couple of more votes. We have like 40 already. Mm-hmm. All right, but there are a couple of player LTVs. I should have said this like predicted, but anyway, looks like majority of you guys are using combined revenue and in-app events. And actually, surprise, surprise, it's our approach too, since the game is primarily in-app purchase monetized, like 65-35 budget split, well, revenue split. All right. Cool. I would like to know what's other. Again, come to me after the session, please. And I want to also talk to people who have predicted LTV there and what they are using for this. It's like, that's of interest of mine now. Cool. So what's the current SKAN setup? Like, in the beginning, just brief history, we started like everyone else with the revenue bucketing. We are using AppsFlyer, so that was the first option. Then we moved to custom revenue buckets based on day zero revenue. So we took all the players, all the payers basically, looked how much they paid within the first 24 hours or day zero, summed it up, and then clustered the revenue buckets accordingly. Now we are in a way that we are using the day zero revenue buckets plus two custom AEO events. So currently it's tutorial complete, which is like around level 5 or 6, and then level up to 10. So we get like some early engagement metrics, and 15 revenue buckets. Well, basically that's it. What we are actually moving towards to is using SSOT from AppsFlyer, so single source of truth, so 1 bit for that. One custom event, we call it monster event, which will be generic event where we push any data from our data warehouse that we decide to test or use or whatever. Like, let's say an event that correlates with a conversion to payers, so we know the amount of payers or the number of payers within first 28 days if we have a metric that correlates with that within first 24 hours, and the revenue buckets. And one thing that we would like to do is predicted LTV. So using 24-hour worth of data to predict 28-day revenue. And this is difficult, but there are some companies even here that might be able to help you with that. So reach out to them. And how to set up the scan for primarily unmonetized games, or how we do it. Basically, we take the revenue from in-app purchases, because like ads have a delay, and the real-time data from SDK from iron source mediation weren't so accurate. So we are using only in-app revenue. We summarize that. Then we order those players from the lowest to highest, and then use a couple of percentile ranges to cover the majority of revenue values, so we get the best accuracy, but also cover the most frequent ones the best, and those that, let's say, pay 200 within the first 24 hours. Okay, there are only a couple of players like that, so don't necessarily waste revenue buckets for this that accurately. And then optionally leave 1 or 2 bits for advanced in-app events or SSOT, which is like our monster event. And how it looks like, yeah, this is revenue bucketing from like 2 years ago. So unfortunately, I don't have the most recent ones. But I believe AppsFlyer, yeah, I'm talking about them because we are using them. They have an advanced option to cluster, and they actually help you set it up, because they have some analytics on top of it. We used it for one of our projects and it worked magic. And the second ones were like just the difference between the player behavior, whether they return on day 1 based on their level they reached within first 24 hours. So that was our setup or our approach to set up the in-app events. And what actually worked on Meta? I was talking a lot about in-app events, a custom AEO. Didn't work. Not really. The only thing that worked for Meta, for us, in terms of optimization was purchase, value, and ROAS. That's it. Install per purchase, okay, but not that good. And custom AEO or install, not worked at all. I mean, like the CPIs might be a little bit lower, but they weren't attracting any good traffic. So the only thing that we are using on Meta is purchase value and minimum ROAS campaigns. Tend to use purchase campaigns on the high tier geos and minimum ROAS on the lower tier geos. And what I mean by that is an additional tip is country clustering. So we run dedicated campaigns for US, Japan, Korea, Germany, you name the big countries where you can benefit from localized creative. So that we run dedicated campaigns on, and then we tiered all the rest of the countries into 2 or 3 tiers and run separate campaigns for each of those with English creative or with DLO. Basically, that's it. And yeah, there's also the limit of 8 or 9 campaigns. So this fits the limitation as well. And we run only 1 campaign per optimization for transition 2. So this would be the setup. It's an example, but it's the way that we tiered the countries based on our data. And then last point, the obvious one, you should have sufficiently large budget, because if you don't reach the privacy threshold of 88 players per day, the performance of the campaign and the stability of the performance just goes to shit. We tested it only recently on another project. We had 4 campaigns. One of them wasn't reaching the privacy threshold. That was the only one that didn't have stability in its performance. The rest of them worked pretty well. That means you should start like around 500 to 1,000 a day, but it depends also on CPIs. And I would suggest start with a little bit higher budget than you would expect, because iOS tends to be a little bit more expensive, but it's not always the case. So do some math from Android to see like what's the basic CPI, and then just multiply it by at least 88 people per day, and it should work fine. So what should you bring from this? Well, some tips, obviously. But I was talking about like custom AO, didn't work. So for us, for this project, and for actually all other projects as well. But purchase value and minimum ROAS worked the best for Meta. And one good thing about Facebook, well, Meta, whatever, and SKAN is that the amount of SKAN values or the SKAN conversion value, SKAN values that were passed to us, the percentage of that increased. But there is one huge problem. Again, it's only in-app ROAS. We don't know anything about ads. And that's an issue that we need to still figure out. So there are things that we are trying to fix now. And it's like how we can adjust or improve the predictions from first 24 hours by using the data that we have on player level basis. And tying that new data back to the cohort bought, let's say, 1 week ago. That's a thing that's we need to fix now, or will not fix, explore. Second one, how to incorporate ad ROAS, because like the game is 65-35, but budget, revenue split. And it, for some geos, it tends to be pretty high portion. It might be even 50-50 for some of the campaigns. And we are not seeing that right now. And using just flat prediction or some flat-ish approximation that doesn't make sense. So we need to figure out that as well. Then, can we use some in-app event with predictive capability? And what I mean by that, is there an event or combination of events or actions within the game that correlates with conversion to payer later? Does it even exist? And if it exists, if we use that for optimization purposes, will it improve the campaigns? Because we couldn't figure it out yet. First the event and then optimization as well. We tested some couple of them on other project on Android, and one thing was the campaigns were more expensive than install ones, but they brought even less revenue, so it didn't make sense at all. We would rather go straight away to purchase campaigns for Android because they tended to yield much lower CPAs or cost per purchase. And then obvious player LTV and SKAN 4.0, but I'm not gonna go into that much. And let's address the elephant in the room, Google. It's like we are here on the Google ground. Let's see what I can bring here. I mean, let's start with the question again, and the last one, by the way. So, did your UA marketing strategy on Google Ads changed post IDFA? And what I mean by this question is like whether your performance and scale improved or decreased, or you had to stop it completely, or what was your situation, guys? Like, I'll share what happened to us in a minute. Okay. Well, there are a couple that have improved performance. Again, please reach out to me. That's why I ask in this polls, because I want to know like how is the rest of the industry working. But yeah, most of the people are answering what I expected to be, similar to us. So in our case, again, both performance and scale have decreased. That's what we experienced. We didn't have to stop on iOS completely, but for some projects, unfortunately, yes. But yeah, but this is pretty good. Well, not pretty good. It's bad, obviously. But I mean, it's good to know. Google guys, look at it. This is the situation of the industry. Please address that. I don't know if they were going to invite me anymore. Okay, let's cut to the chase. So, some specifics. Obviously, the most important one is tracking and measurement. For Meta, you can use AppsFlyer or some postbacks like that, but for Google, it's crucial to have Firebase was like, this is the only way to optimize and to track things properly. But be aware of the differences of in tracking. We were used to use only net revenue for purchases, which was from internal tracking for our payment system. Didn't know that Firebase is using the gross values. And for a couple of months, like in the past, it was like a couple of years ago, we didn't know that. So even when we were running TRAS campaigns on Android, we realized, well, there's like 40% less of ROAS, well, more. So we need to like completely change the way we set up the target ROAS for those campaigns. So be aware of that. I believe like most of you guys know this, but we learned the hard way. And performance evaluation, and this is the tricky part, and this is one thing that we couldn't figure out completely yet. And yeah, the important thing, using NAB model conversions instead of SKAN, which you need to incorporate the conversion modeling delay that was already mentioned, but I think Mariusz will be talking about as well. So 3 to 5 days plus the conversion window that is set up there. And ultimately, like when we tackle Google Ad performance on iOS, we tend to use on geo level performance. So looking at isolated experiments of running only Google on specific geo to see what's the uplift on the organic, or what's the uplift on overall installs from the specific geo, because ultimately that's the only way how to make sure what's the value that's coming from Google, because what actually was happening to us with the modeled conversions, they tend to be a little bit higher than we would expect. Of course, incorporating the net versus brutto difference, but they tend to be a little bit slightly higher, and they don't always make sense when you are running multiple networks per one geo on a project. So there are a couple of specifics that you need to take into account. But ultimately, if you want to see the value of Google, which there is, use isolated experiments for geos. So stop the activity for a couple of days on Meta, other networks whatsoever, and test it by yourself. What's the value in it? But when we take a look at the same chart, like on Meta, two things to notice. We tried to scale significantly in the beginning of 2022. It wasn't that good, obviously, that I mentioned already. But the thing is that actually improved over the last couple of months is the amount of conversion values that it's coming from SKAN network, which improved significantly. It's still way below what we would expect. The ROAS numbers are, well, don't look good at all, but it's much better than it was in, like, let's say last year. So I hope that will improve over time, and more so with the SKAN 4.0 and other inventory added, and that will be trackable by SKAN, but we'll have to wait for it, I guess, for a couple of more months. So, and in terms of like what worked and what didn't, it's the same. Target CPA and TRAS. TRAS beta on iOS, yeah, it's on beta, but if you have it, test it. It might work pretty well. What didn't work so far that well is using video as its custom AEO and passing it to TRAS. Well, we need to test that. And install, even though we could decrease the CPI significantly, for our game, it didn't work because the game is a little bit more niche and attracts specific audience. If you have a broad game, broad genre, something that everybody knows, like some hyper casual games, might work good. But for us, it didn't work. With a target setup, that's an example for TRAS. We tend to use a little bit higher or much higher than on Android because of, well, I don't have a reason right now, but because of the net versus brutto, but it's on Android as well. But we tend to like keep it on a lower scale by making the target more distant or not so reachable. And counter clustering, similar to Meta, nothing new there. And sufficiently large campaigns budget like Meta, nothing new here as well. So, and what are the challenges? Again, same like on Meta, but also address optimization that really worked well on Android. Like really, really good type of optimization if you have ad revenue coming in, even with a split 65-35. worked really well. We would love to see that on iOS. If it works on iOS the way it worked on an Android, amazing opportunity. We need to figure out the incrementality of running Google Ads when we are running multiple networks per geo, because you're reducing your scale when you're running only one network per geo. So this is one thing that we need to find some mathematical analytical approach how to measure it. And the last thing is like making sense out of the mess between SKAN data and the model conversion data for purchases in ROAS. Like installs, okay, like they tend to be on par or with some differences, but SKAN only has 24 hours of data of in a purchase events. Model conversions have to, you name the conversion window, and that's the value there. But we need to figure that out before we can scale up again. And it's a challenge that we need to tackle, because there are still many discrepancies. And I'm getting to the end of my presentation. It's like it's already a lot. Nice. 2 changes we made in 2023 that we didn't do, we should have done much sooner. And I don't know why we didn't, but anyway, at least some gains from all of the pains that we encounter. DSPs and ad networks, so using something else than Meta and Google for acquisition, because like there are many networks that you can use. And then fake ads. I mean, like it's in the quotes because they're sort of fake. Well, they look like they're part of the gameplay, but it's not actually 100% gameplay. I'll show you why in a minute. So with the DSPs and ad networks, remember the slide with iOS budget splits? And I mean like this part, we weren't experimenting when we had the chance at all with the video ad networks. And that caught up with us now, because now learning now how to run Iron Source, Unity, Uplevin, Moloko, Liftoff, and other DSPs is super difficult, and there's so much bigger pressure from the shareholders and board, because the numbers aren't that good overall. So if we want to diversify and explore new opportunities, it's super difficult now. We should have known, we didn't, and it was a mistake. But we learned the hard way, and now we need to tackle this as well. So that's the first. So diversify, even if it seems hard at the start, is the only way to move forward. Like we put all eggs in one basket, and it hurt us actually. And then fake ads. So PlayStation 2 isn't about this, obviously, but these are a couple of new creatives that our creative team prepared last month. I don't know the results yet, so I can't say if it's good or bad or how it is. But for other projects, they worked really, really, really well. This type of creative. And there's one lesson, or the lesson is focus on things that work and drive ROAS and value, and don't get stuck in your strategy. We got stuck in our creative strategy that we don't want to use fake ads because, well, they are fake and we are misleading the players. But ultimately, we could have grown much bigger, much better over the last years if we used creatives that the rest of the industry is using for some reason, obviously, because obviously it drives value, and we've seen it on our own eyes right now, when a project that couldn't drive any value on iOS suddenly was profitable for 3 weeks in a row because they used the fake ads that we prepared only recently. So don't get stuck and iterate as soon as possible. So to wrap things up, 4 points. Adapt quickly when things are about to change, and don't get stuck in your ideas or strategy or whatsoever. You need to adapt. That's one of the most important points. Focus on the value drivers. So if something's bringing value, use that. Don't waste the opportunity. Get your data right. This is a tricky and important part. You have to make decisions on something. So make the most sense out of the differences between SKAN, conversion value modeling, and all these things. And last but not least, don't be afraid to experiment. And experiment when you can, not when you're right at the edge of profitability, because it will be much easier when you have a buffer. And that's it. Thank you for your attention. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. And yeah, I put it here as well.
Okay.
So now you can see the questions, and I can answer a couple of them.
Yeah. So like, how many creatives did you iterate to find best performing in different locations? Any tools used for it? I think that in some way it was like the question asked for like Victoria, but like if you could maybe like answer as well.
That's a good question. Well, a lot, but I would like to have a much bigger pool of creatives. I don't know if I can remember from the top of my head how many of them, but like find a good creative concept that works, that really works. I would say is like 20% of time, maybe 10. It depends on the project again, and then one of the mistakes that we made is like, oh yes, let's find another one based on some strategy, and not reiterate the shit out of it from the ones that you find working. When you find something that works, just milk the cow. I guess that's the
Try to
advice.
find different variations of that best working.
Yeah, different variations, lengths, the cut scenes, different. Like it's like ultimately you can't really find a reason why something works. We only think that we know why it works. Ultimately, like if the algorithm picks it up and it works, just like iterate the most out of it.
How are you preparing for Google privacy changes and ID depreciation that's coming? Do you think it's apocalypse 2.0?
I hope not. Like, I'm a firm believer that Google knows that they are in the advertising business, and in their best interest to prepare the product the way that is not gonna hurt the advertisers. It's not Apple. They just wanted to, yeah, you know what they wanted to do. So.
Actually, we'll have the presentation about that tomorrow, so we'll touch that topic.
So we are preparing like in a way that we are exploring what's there, testing the frameworks, talking to Google guys. But I think it's like in 2 years anyway. So I mean, we should be preparing more, but that's always the case. Prepare more than you have time for.
And the questions like around this SKAN 4.0 is quite interesting. Like, what setup are you thinking of applying for when the SKAN 4.0 is fully running?
Yeah, well, good question. Not 100% sure what. Like, I mean, like the base, not the course values, but the ones that are for the 64 values that we can use, we will be keeping like it is. I mean, maybe, yeah, that's and for the course values, I think if we have some signals about the value of the users coming from there from later, like day 3, day 7, we would utilize that, like if it's a good or bad, but not 100% correct strategy yet. We didn't figure it out yet.
What are your top 3 iOS channels for now?
Depends on the project, but I would say Meta, Moloko, and Google. Not in not specific order.
But Google is there as well, yeah?
Did I have to say it?
He said that, yeah? So
I mean, no. But it actually worked, but the scale was much lower than in the past on iOS. And we tested only for a couple of geos. I mean, on Transition 2, it was US and Japan that worked really well for a couple of months, I believe so. But as you could see on the chart, it decreased over the last couple of weeks because, well, obviously the overall numbers decreased. So we need to test like what was the reason behind, if it was Google or Meta or whatever, since we don't have the user level data.
And how are you planning to track incrementality of Google Ads?
Good question. Does somebody have an answer? We tried MMM, not the one tool that we used for that didn't work that much, but we should have a call next week. They will present something to us.
But are you thinking about some geo tests or like similar ones?
Yeah, geotest. Like ultimately, like we are doing in-house testing in a way that we would pause the activity on all channels for a couple of days or even a day or so, and then we add a new network to specific geo and see what's the lift. But it's like time consuming and missed opportunity. If you have like 5 channels and you would add them like on a weekly basis and add another one, if it doesn't cannibalize something, it's gonna get way too difficult. So there are like analytical approaches to it, but from like MMM approach, what we tested didn't work that well so far. But we only tested one tool anyway.
It requires a lot of preparation. Okay, thank you, Michal. Thank you very much.